I always describe Derek as the combination of three actual living men, right? First is a work colleague of mine, Rob, who is essentially like the blueprint for Derek. If you're looking at him through like a I don't know, kind of like a statistical approach or a resume approach, you know. So, um, Rob's a retired Marine Corps officer. Rob did all this high speed stuff that can't be talked about because he was in Marine Force Recon, excuse me. And Rob runs his own wilderness survival school. So we were work colleagues. We used to BS a whole lot. He told me this story. I'm trying to be succinct, but basically, he was in the running for his own survival show out in Hollywood, along the lines of like Bear Grylls or Survivor Man. All those shows. This was like before Alone came out and before like the survivalist popularity exploded. So he was like right on the cusp of that. And essentially, the producers wanted him to divulge his military background, which Rob couldn't do. And being a man of integrity, he refused. And they said, "Well, your story isn't captivating enough for us to justify a show." We were really banking on that military background to kind of like work into the filming. And he told me this, and I got pissed off. I was like they actually used the words to him this is from him relaying it to me, and they said, "You're just a boring house dad," and that like pissed me off because like this guy is a friggin' badass, he still is to this day. And I said to Rob, I was like, Rob, I'll write you I like to write. I do it as a hobby. I do fiction writing. I read thriller novels. Like, I'll write you a fictitious backstory and you can market it as, your wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This might have been me. This might not have been me based on a true story kind of thing. And we got a good laugh out of it, and it was fun. And I went home and I wrote a couple pages, and then I wrote a couple pages more, and he read them and he liked them, and we started like talking, and then boom, just the whole premise of the Instructor just took off. It was like the match to the powder keg. A retired Force Recon Marine officer who has now reintegrated into civilian life and runs his own wilderness survival school gets approached to teach a private class to a group of individuals that wish to remain anonymous, which, because of some hardships and some financial burdens, he takes. But in doing so, he begins to suspect that the group is actually a domestic terrorist cell. So that was the premise behind the Instructor. Like I said, Rob laid the groundwork for the character from that kind of like background type area. And then I started adding meat to the bone as you were from there. The other one is my father, also the Marine, the Marine who got it right. Yeah, thanks, Dad. Okay. Yeah, and a lot of Derek's admirable qualities come from my father. His tenacity, his devotion to his family, his sacrifice for his family, his humor despite the burdens that he's shouldering, and trying and desiring and striving to be a good man despite all the mountains of shit that life is throwing at you, and that's where you get Derek's admirable stuff. Derek's less than admirable characteristics came from my own experiences, where I used, again, kind of that catharsis, therapeutic type writing to expunge a lot of that garbage from myself, but add it into Derek. And that was twofold. That was one, for my own therapeutic process, but it was two also because I wanted to do something like I had this platform, and I don't know if I've ever going to get this platform again, but I knew that I at least had this novel that was going to be distributed nationwide and, God willing, however much further. Um, and it might be my only chance to kind of raise awareness of some of the trials and tribulations that reintegrating veterans go through. And Derek very much became a conduit for that, So he's dealing with PTSD, he's dealing with anger management and wild mood swings and nightmares and just violent outbursts and all these things, alcohol dependency, stuff that he's trying to do. So you see this kind of tortured soul of a man who is genuinely a good man, and he's just trying to do right by life, but he keeps getting hammered. And because of the things that he's seen and done overseas, um, his responses aren't always in the best interest of those around him and himself. And I take a lot of pride in that, because I get vets that will reach out to me like, "Hey, man, you got it right. Like you got it." And I'm like, because I lived it, so it was true to life in that regard. So whenever if you're reading the Instructor and you're reading about Derek screaming in his car until the veins pop out of his neck and he bursts capillaries under his eyes, yeah, that was me, not my dad. Marshall is he was a lot of fun to write. He's a little cliche at times, he likes to do, but basically the premise behind Marshall was this kind of undertone in this lesson that I took away from Iraq, which is that of like religious extremism, and how any religion, whatever your beliefs, whatever your faith may be, they can be convoluted and manipulated and turned into something that I believe the particular faith was not intended to do, but it can be spun around for these extremist purposes. And everybody goes to Islamic extremists is the kind of example of the day, but I thought it would be interesting to have a Roman Catholic extremist, to show that it doesn't matter what the religion is. Like, I even put that in my acknowledgments. I'm like, I was raised a Roman Catholic. I have my own personal faith and everything. Don't come down on me, don't have the Catholic Church come down on me because I was using Bible quotes in this bad way. That's the whole point. The point is that religious zealotry does exist, religious extremism does exist. And just because this guy, Marshall, is supposedly a preacher and a Roman Catholic and is reciting Bible quotes, does not mean that he has good intentions. Like you have to also have that head on your shoulders to realize, okay, this guy's crazy. And that is where you blend the charisma and the intelligence of Marshall, where it starts to bleed into the manipulation, and he becomes more of a cult leader, where he's recruiting these impressionable people that will buy his message hook, line, and sinker. And that was a very, I mean, this sounds demented, but that was a very fun thing to create, because I was doing a lot of research on different extremist cults, and more so not just the leader, because there's inherent traits to all cult leaders, but also the followers. Like, what were the conditions of those people's lives, not only from a personality standpoint, but also the incidents and conditions that had happened to them throughout their life that led them to this juncture point where this cult leader could step in and spew some stuff into their ear, and they buy it hook, line, and sinker, and just from then on they're there. So I found that fascinating. And I thought, as I started exploring this concept, I was like, I need a powerful antagonist that has that control over people, because how else do you explain a host of 100 folks giving up their lives, going off the grid, living in the woods of upstate New York, freezing to death, starving, unless there is some serious, devotion and belief behind it. And Marshall had to be the magnet for all that, essentially. So he was a lot of fun. I also love if you've ever seen Avatar, the great actor is named Stephen Lang, and I mean, he's phenomenal, and he's been in more stuff than you even realize. He was in Tombstone with Kurt Russell. You don't realize that, but he's one of the opposing cowboys at the OK Corral. He's awesome in everything that he's ever been in, and I loved watching him in Avatar because he was kind of like front and center as the main villain. And I remember watching that and saying, that's my Marshall right there. Like you slap a gray beard and a flannel jacket on him, and that's my Marshall. And then he went on and did like Don't Breathe, and it was even closer to Marshall, So if you're ever wondering who I was picturing when I was writing him in terms of a physical appearance, look at Stephen Lang and throw a beard on him, and that's him. The funny thing about the Instructor and the Infiltrator, which wasn't named at the time, but I was signed to a 2-book deal out the gate, so I knew that I had the sequel coming, and so a lot of in the back of my mind while writing the Instructor and kind of revising it was also laying groundwork for events in the Infiltrator. And same thing, it's even done even more so in the Infiltrator with laying groundwork for book number 3, because all these events like chain together. I will say that with the Infiltrator, there was definitely, you still have a lot of tension building, a lot of intrigue / espionage as people are like working their agendas. But the main difference between Instructor and Infiltrator, there's a lot more character development and world building, and like kind of setting the stage in the Instructor, rightfully so. It's the first book in the series. And in the Infiltrator, we kind of get to it, like it's fast and furious. Once that match hits the powder keg, it explodes pretty well. And then it's just, a race to the finish line. It's just one action sequence after another. And I think I really enjoyed that aspect of the plot. It's like trying to pick your favorite kid, it's just, you can't pick which one you like more. They're just different. And I definitely enjoyed the Infiltrator because of how fast paced the plotting was in this time. It's Autumn's Tithe. It is what you think, and without trying to do any spoilers for the Instructor, but essentially, it's not just a one-off. The whole kind of premise behind the Instructor is just this one camp in upstate New York, and however that resolves, you think it's all said and done, and then lo and behold, you find out, oh no, there were much broader plans, many more cells, if you were, but there's still the same organization, but we do really start to expand, because as you kind of just thinking from the military, but as you like start building out logistically and like, okay, now I've got multiple locations, like we're up and down the East Coast and even bleeding into the Midwest in the Infiltrator. So it's like, it can't just be the camps operating on their own. There needs to be a logistical support structure as well. There needs to be, like, where are they getting these people? So there's a recruiting arm as well. So you start making inferences like that. It does all fall under the banner of the Autumn's Tithe group that Marshall started, which is now being run by his successor, which I'm not going to explain how that comes about. But yeah, we start getting broader in our landscape of just how, not just a geographical landscape, but just how far reaching this agenda and conspiracy might actually be going. It's a really fun relationship to work with, because ideologically they hate each other, absolutely despise one another. But from kind of like two master chess players, there's a mutual respect for one another, and even um a good old fashioned kind of like jaw jacking, like shit talking to one another, like, oh, you won this round, but I'll get you next time, and she's constantly berating him for being a meathead, jarhead, you know, just Jim Bro kind of character, and he's always talking to her about being, an uptight accountant that has never actually set foot in the real world kind of thing. And it's just fun to have those back and forths. There's even little hints of like a mutual attraction between them. If like, I don't go down that road because it's impossible to do with the story. Once you read the story, you'll be like, there's no enemies to lovers possible arc here at all. But again, like where they recognize the mutual respect for one another, there's also kind of like a mutual attraction where she's like, in another world, this guy would be pretty handsome, and in another world, this girl would be pretty gorgeous, and that kind of tension is inlaid as well a little bit, So it was a really, really fun dynamic to do in the beginning of number 3. um there's a good like back and forth with them, again, like battle of the wits kind of thing, and I enjoy writing those exchanges.